I am Cedia.
I am Cedia.
I am Cedia.
This is the Cedia podcast.
65% of all the support calls we get are fixed by switching stuff off and back on.
Welcome to a special edition of the Cedia podcast. This is audio from a fascinating main stage presentation from ISE 2020. It's a panel discussion with integrators and interior designers and how they can all work together. It's taken from the Cedia Design Build Conference that happened at that show. This conversation is especially useful for our friends in the design community, since a lot of their questions are answered herein. We'll turn this over to the host of that discussion from Wildwood PR in the UK, our good friend Jeff Hayward, and he will introduce the panelists.
Delighted to be joined by two past presidents of the British Institute of Interior Design. Dean, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Dean Keyworth, as you said, a former president of BIID, and I do residential design in central London.
I'm Susie Rumbold. I almost forgot who I was there. I run a company called Tessuto Interiors. We're a mixed practice. We do commercial and residential work.
And I'm also delighted to be joined by two integrators. Pip, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Pip Evans, work for NV Integration. We are a central London-based AV company, as we are known as the AV guys, working on high-end residential projects, private client mostly.
And I'm James Ratcliffe. Company is Homeplay, and we're based just outside London in Sunbury, but we cover London, Surrey, and Europe quite often as well. Yeah.
And we thought this session would be really useful because these are people who are doing real projects. They're coming up with real questions and real solutions. So let's hear what they've got to say. Dive straight in. Dean, you're first up with usability.
Usability. Yeah, I've had problems in the past where the homeowner specs everything and then the family and maybe the staff start using it incorrectly and jabbing buttons and blinds go wrong and everything. How do you go about training customers so that all the users know how to work it properly?
I think the main thing is to make it so that the system, you don't need training. It should be intuitive so that you can just walk up to it and figure it out. So a good example is a keypad. There's an image rolling around here that you'll see in a minute that you don't need training. If you want to put the lights onto the bright setting, you push the button that says bright. If you want to turn and it's just intuitive. So I think that's the key thing, to make sure that it's been thought of so that anyone can use it without having it explained. But that doesn't always happen. Over the years, we've had a lot of clients come to us and say, "Oh, I had a Lutron Control 4 system in our old house, and we hated it, and we couldn't use it, and it was awful, and I don't want it again. I just want something simple." But the reality is, simplicity does require some complexity, but in the background. So if you've got a beautiful lighting design with dozens of circuits in a room, trying to control that with a bunch of rotary dimmers is pretty much impossible. Whereas if it's on a simple preset that with an engraved button that anyone can understand, that's what should be done.
So what you're saying, James, is don't blame the brand, blame the integrator.
Yes. Yeah.
Pip, have you got a view?
I agree with James a lot. The training is so hard because it's relative to the user, and so many things, and all these systems are designed bespoke. So it's a very, very difficult thing. But I completely agree that really it should be so intuitive that it doesn't need training. I know a story from a colleague. He went into a client's house to do a handover, and the guy was sat there at his desk in his study, and he paid for this huge AV system, and he was listening to music from Spotify, which was playing from the speakers on his phone on the table. And you just think at that point, we've totally failed you, because it just wasn't simple enough that he could, figure out himself. A great example of things like that is that, we like things to be beautiful, and quite often what is beautiful is very minimal, but that doesn't always lend itself to being the most user intuitive. Just to give you an example, Control 4. They make some two brands of remotes. They have a very, very sleek design-led remote, which has got a touch screen, and it's very, very ergonomic and sleek. And then they have another remote, which looks a lot more ugly, but it's way more functional. And we tend to steer customers who show them both, but we tend to steer them towards the one which has the physical hard buttons, because you don't have to navigate a touch screen to pick your Sky channel. So things like that, horses for courses.
So compromise on the aesthetics sometimes to get the simplicity?
It absolutely depends on the client, I think, because people who have grown up with the iPhone generation, perhaps they're very familiar and used to using a touchscreen on their remote, whereas a client who is in their later years, they would be much, much more familiar with physical hard buttons. And obviously those physical hard buttons with other systems, they can be engraved. Lots of our clients, they have their second houses in London, so English isn't their first language. We've done lighting control keypads on the wall in Russian text, in Italian, lots of other languages, which is, I think, is just an important thing. It's not our house, it's our customer's house. So we need to make it for them.
And Susie, you had another line about usability, I think.
Yeah, so many systems now are controlled of handheld devices. Does it create problems if people living in the same home do not have? Because I've come from a house where half the house is Apple and half the house is Android. Is it an issue if people don't have the same brand of devices? Are you committing yourself down one path?
No, absolutely not. They all have, as long as you haven't got some left field phone that's, not really supported anymore. Most people have got an iPhone or an Android, and both of those have apps. And thankfully, these days, sometimes in the past, if the client changed their phone, it might have needed myself or James to have some intervention into, getting that changeover sorted. But these days, it's literally, a username and password.
They won't conflict? You won't have an issue with controllability or priority or anything with different devices coming from different brands?
No, I mean, no. If you have an Android phone, there's an Android app. If you've got an iPhone, there's an iOS app, and there's no issue with them fighting each other or anything like that.
Or changeover, yeah.
And also, I understand recently that Apple have stopped using the standard USB port, which kind of creates a load of issues if you've just put double 13-amp sockets with USB ports all over a house.
Yeah, that's more of a, sorry James, that's more of a frustration, I think, than anything. And I remember I had lightning cables with the old USB style, which are slowly becoming defunct because they don't plug into my MacBook anymore. And I said to one of my colleagues at the time when that happened, like, this is a real pain. I have to carry an adapter around with me. And he said, yeah, but in 10 years' time, everything will have moved over, and we'll probably be complaining again that USB-C, which has been the latest standard for the last 10 years, is now being phased out for another one.
Would you recommend that we're no longer specifying those plugs with the integral?
I think they'll be around for a good while to come because there's so many of them out there, and people don't tend to change their plug sockets on a regular basis. I think for the foreseeable
So you're still
future,
okay to keep speccing those?
Yeah, because there's no alternative right now. You
No,
can't
okay.
get a
No.
USB-C plug socket. So
Yeah, and to be honest with you, on the major online shop that sounds like a jungle, you can get these cables pretty easily, and also the interconnect. So if you've got a customer that's got a new cable or a new phone, you can
just buy an extension
You
piece.
can buy the dongle for a couple of pounds, and
Okay.
it'll make
Cool.
it work.
Cool, thank you. Right, space, Dean.
Chris, in his presentation earlier, showed us the beautifully cabled rack, but a lot of my work's in central London apartments where space is at a premium. Are there any tricks of minimising the space you need for the backroom stuff like the racks?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. First of all, the lighting panels are often something that take up a lot of room. In the old days, we were using big racks of dimmers, which could be pretty significant in size. It might take up, half of that section of that wall there for a large apartment. That's like you say, it's a struggle to find that inside a London apartment. So the lighting technology is kind of moving away from the dimming panel up into the ceiling, so that the control gear is actually next to the light. That way you just need a very small controller which can mount in a cupboard, and then the dimming is actually done in the fitting itself. So that's one way. And the other thing is that we're
Just on that point, James, for the room, that's DALI for everyone who's
Yes,
who's
DALI.
who's wondering what that is, and,
Yeah.
and the panel which we're talking about on the wall, which would be half of that wall, or at least the width of that curtain, can be reduced massively to maybe 10% of the size.
Well, I guess typically speaking, one dimmer that big would do 4 groups of light, 4 circuits of light, whereas with a DALI controller, the same size box will do up to 16 groups of light. So it's way more compact. So that's one way of doing it. The other way, we do less and less centralized equipment. Things like SkyQ are meaning that we're not necessarily putting everything in a large rack and then sending it out around the rest of the house. A lot of the stuff's tending to go more local in the rooms these days. There are still ways of us hiding that and making it look good, but that is a trend. You've got anything?
Yeah. Just to add on that thing about localized or centralized, we could probably do a half-day panel discussion on that alone.
Yeah.
I wouldn't from my point of view and just from our experience, I would always aim to start with everything in one centralized location. And I think we might talk about some reasons why later on. But another space-saving idea that I could just think of is we use a centralized system which consists of speakers in the ceiling and then amplifiers in one place in the house. We were able to condense that technology a lot, which is a useful application for marine as well, by having what's called active speakers. So there's a few brands out there that you may know of, and you can take the amplifier, you put it inside the speaker in the ceiling, and then you've more distributedly, evenly spaced where that technology needs to be in the house. And that's a really great tip for marine as well, because if you're doing any marine projects, marine, in a boat, it really doesn't like a really, really heavy part and then light stuff everywhere else. It's really good to space the weight out. Yeah.
When do you when do you normally get called in and say and told this is the space you've got for all your
quite
gear?
often when it's all been decorated. But the best time is when it's all on paper and nothing's actually been done. So much of what we do is quite architectural, and we can just do a better result if we're involved earlier, really.
100%. And thankfully, every project, no two projects are the same, and it will quite often depend on, A, the client, but B, how much the client is willing to appoint professionals in the design phase, stage 3, stage 4, at the start of the project. That we are thankfully getting called earlier and earlier, much to the benefit of the project, and I think also to the industry as a whole, because I was on a course last week and they were talking about how to not design at the top of a ladder, which means when this thing doesn't fit in that shape, you then get your creative thinking hat on. If that's the case, we failed, and we need to make sure that these things fit with really, really, really thorough design at the start. So yeah, big advocates for that.
You've got a follow-up, Susie.
Yeah, no. I was going to ask about. I know quite a lot of this kit actually chucks out a lot of heat, and I'm just wondering about what sort of ventilation requirements you have if you've got big racks, and also then following on from what you were saying about things becoming more localized around installs these days, do you then therefore have to have ventilation in your ceilings if some of this localized kit is chucking out heat?
Yeah.
And what happens if you don't have that coolness in place?
Yeah. The number one killer of audiovisual equipment or IT equipment is heat. Number 2 is static, interestingly. So if we were to be engaged in a project, the typical process is that we would do the brief, and then we would start the design phase, and as part of the design we would calculate how much device in a centralized location will generate in terms of the kilowatts or the BTUs. Now from that we issue that information to the mechanical guys, and they calculate the cooling required to basically do net zero, depending on the size of the system and what it can have. That can be a large part of the project, and it does need to be in consideration. But if you don't consider it, the customer will be living indefinitely with problems, because heat is the number one killer. Just as an interesting fact for you all here, if you try and keep the temperature in an AV cupboard to 24 degrees, that means that inside the black box is actually closer to 30, because that's where the heat's generated. And so 24 degrees is,
too warm.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, everything is okay under 30. That's the sort of sweet mark that we're aiming for, but we need to achieve 24 in the room, and to get that 30. The other thing that you need to consider is if you're having, let's say we're putting an AV system in a garage at the moment. That's our centralized location, and we're talking to the customer about, do you want to see the AV? Do you want it hidden away? Should we put in encasing joinery? But obviously that will have a huge impact, because there's no point in cooling the garage if we're then going to close it in joinery and it's not feeling the effects of the fan.
Or quite often in a garage it can get too cold a lot of the time as well, actually.
So is cold just as damaging to a kit as
Yeah,
heat?
the hard drives in particular. Yeah.
So if 30 is the sweet spot for heat, what's the...
That's the upper limit, really.
Yeah, but what's the lower limit?
It has to get pretty low.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, in a garage, I mean, it's not the heat thing is a much bigger
Right.
consideration.
Yeah, I think we have more consistent weather in the UK, especially indoors, and in modern efficient buildings, the cool isn't really a big consideration.
And is the heat still an issue then as you start putting stuff in the ceilings?
Well, there's stuff designed to go into a ceiling.
So it's probably not as sensitive.
Not an issue,
Okay.
no,
Yeah.
no.
Cool. James, you talked about being involved at an early stage on a project, which is desirable. Just want to explore that a bit more in terms of briefing, because I know, Dean, you had a question about when you receive a brief from a client, what happens. So
Yeah, sometimes, and I think we've all had this, the designers in the room, that you get a brief from a client and it really doesn't match the house they're living in at all. And so we have to try and steer them to something more appropriate. And I wonder if you ever get briefs like that where they want this, that, and the other, it's just not feasible or not right for the
Literally
house.
yesterday, I had someone email me and say, we've been recommended to you. We just want a really, really simple, basic system. But as I was saying, this is a beautiful house with lots of beautiful lighting and lovely finishes, and it requires a certain amount of complexity to make it simple. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I think people say, oh, I don't want any tech, I don't need any tech. But if we don't put the tech in, it'll actually be more difficult to use than if we didn't. Because the systems are, they do make controlling lots of different disparate systems easier. A good example is heating, for instance. So if you ever tried to control to program a thermostat from the 3 buttons on the front of it, it's really fiddly to do. Apart from the thermostat just looking ugly on the wall, we can make the thermostat disappear by using an invisible plaster-in temperature sensor. So immediately the walls just look better. But then you can program it to set your on and off times and your wake and leave and sleep times using an iPad or an iPhone in a user interface that we're all used to using, rather than the kind of interface that you used to have on a VCR back in the 80s. So yeah, absolutely, that's a key thing. People not understanding, saying they want it simple but not.
So the result is simplicity. What you have to deliver is really complex. Do you ever get into a situation with an interior designer where they think you're overselling them stuff because it shouldn't be that complex because it's a simple result, surely?
It's been said, yeah.
Sorry, James. I'll just say on that point, I've got an interior designer that we work with, and we have a good partnership with, and every time we start discussing a project and the customer wants to have lighting control as an example, the interior designer's first point to say is maybe they would like a graphic eye, which is like something that you would use to control this room, for example. It's designed for completely one room because it costs about £800 and it's been around for about 20 years and they know it, when really what they should probably have is a full house lighting control system because that's what they need, but it will cost X times more. So yeah, we quite see that a lot.
Another question then that comes from this is budget. So designers have finite budgets given to them by clients. You guys come along and say, well, you need all of this. How do you work out how much to allocate to technology?
It's a tough question, but it's a discussion that needs having early on. We know, because we do this every day, we can look at a floor plan of a house and give a very quick budget figure for doing all the kind of things that we would normally do. So lighting, music, some TVs, heating control, air conditioning control, CCTV, or blinds, all that sort of thing. So, and there's an excellent online budget calculator as well, where we can go in and very quickly say, how many square foot is the house? How many rooms do you want music in? So that identifying the budget is a key thing to do earlier on. Otherwise, you could be wasting each other's time.
And how much should, is it like 3%, 5%? How much should clients be allocating for designers? If you're trying to sort of inform your clients about how much the technology is likely to cost before they've even decided to reach out to an integrator. Or is it just not possible to say?
Yeah, it really is, because there's so many variables. There's so many things you can do. You well know that in a large house you can easily spend 100k on shading, blinds and curtains and things like that. So,
but also it's so client specific, isn't it? Because some people want a rotary dimmer or a toggle switch, or even sometimes you've got a husband and wife who want completely polar opposites.
But let's
and
assume it's a level 4 house. Would I be
things.
allocating 5% of my total budget?
What is your total budget?
Good question.
Yeah. I try, and there's another way to look at it, and I know some integrators do use this, and we call it a built-in works package and a final fit package. So, they talk about VAT exemptions, and they say turn the house upside down and shake it out, and everything that falls out, that's your FF&E, your final fit, and everything that's built-in works stays in. So cable, anything that's architectural, keypads, speakers, the lighting control system. And so we could give the customer what we call a baseline cost, so that they know that they need to spend this much and they can get the house finished. Now that will have sockets on the walls, clean endpoints to the wiring, but it won't include typically what is the most expensive part, which is the shiny stuff that goes on the end, and then they can review what budget they have left.
What shiny stuff they actually want.
Exactly, yeah. But the critical thing, as we've seen from basically everything we've talked about today, or from the CPD earlier, is get the wiring infrastructure in early and do it right. And if anything, for the cost of the cable, which is relative, do everything that you think you might want. Because a wall plate over there in the corner of the room, which is giving you the facility to add the TV when the children grow up, is going to be so much better than trying to retrofit, reverse engineer, do a wireless solution, or even worse, chase walls at the end of in 5 years' time.
Sure.
Plus, also have your Christmas tree socket.
Yeah, that's a very good one. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Do you still need wires? Because everything's wireless.
Yeah, we get that a lot. Well, wired infrastructure is necessary to make wireless work well. So Wi-Fi, I would imagine that a lot of you have problems with Wi-Fi in your home. It's a really common issue. Wi-Fi will sometimes travel through one wall, 2 walls, you're really pushing your luck, and 3 walls, forget it. So by having lots of Wi-Fi transmitters around the house, you can get past that problem. But each of those Wi-Fi transmitters requires a cable running to it. So good wired infrastructure is super important for wireless to work.
A good tip, or to help you guys understand what the way I understand it, a great way to think about a copper cable is like a hose pipe. Now, the data that goes down that hose pipe is water. With the copper Cat5, Cat6, Cat7 cables that we've been putting in the houses for the past 10 plus years, the copper hose pipe has been completely maxed out by things like 4K, 8K TVs. We cannot fit the water in the hose pipe anymore. We've already completed it. So when people say, oh, can't we just do it all wirelessly these days? Well, we can't even do it on a cable. So for that, we use fiber optic cables now to distribute video signals, which are uncompressed. The way we get around it is we use compression, but fiber optic cables are the future there, really. So the other good thing about that is if you do network your TVs and you do as much as you can on wired, it keeps that wireless channel free, the bandwidth free for the browsing, for the customer's phone, emails, streaming. So.
Okay. Susie, you had a question about longevity.
Yeah, so does all this kit that we're putting, does it need regular servicing and maintenance? What sort of regimes do clients need to set up to make sure that and what happens when it goes wrong?
Sorry, James. I have an example. Yeah, just a quick example. When that question comes up, I say to people, do you own a car? And everyone says, well, yeah, I own a car, I drive a car. And when you buy that car, do you take that car back to BMW, Mercedes, or whoever it is, once a year, once every 2 years, to have a service? It has its MOT. And I think our systems need to be treated in exactly the same way, because when you sell that system and you do the handover and you sign off, that relationship is just starting, really, and that's the way that it needs to be, because we look at the Wi-Fi standard now from what it was 5 years ago, it has gone like this. So if customers want the best Wi-Fi and to continue to invest in their houses so they are at the latest trend, I think there are parts which need to be regularly reviewed.
Yeah, so there are certain things in a house that will last for a decade or more. Speakers, not a lot happens in speaker technology, so that doesn't tend to get upgraded as frequently. But then other things like TVs, we've moved from HD to 4K and beyond. So those kind of devices can be upgraded more frequently. And the support is a key part to all this. So as well as being there to do regular firmware updates to make sure the system's secure and it's got all the latest features, just having an integrator that is available and has a proper support channel rather than just maybe the mobile phone of the owner of the company, it is hugely important. And when you're choosing an integrator, make sure they do have a proper support system. Ours runs from 8 in the morning till 10 at night, 7 days a week, so that when you need the help, which is normally in the evenings and at the weekend, because that's when you're home and you're using your system, that's the point where you need the help, and the integrator needs to be available. That stuff breaks. 65% of all the support calls we get are fixed by switching stuff off and back on, which we can do remotely as well. So we've got monitoring systems in our clients' houses that enable us to see what devices are online and offline. Clients on a premium level will have us monitor that so that we can proactively see if anything has gone gone offline and deal with it before it causes them an issue. But we can very easily remotely power cycle things. And it's normally things like Sky boxes and Apple TV boxes. And 8 o'clock in the evening and you go to watch a film and your Sky box won't work, we can remotely switch it off and back on and get you up and running again.
Cool. Okay, we're going to talk about some specific technologies now. Dean, you had a question about media rooms.
Yeah, you might have had this discussion once or twice before with an interior designer. So where the client hasn't got a specific media room or home cinema, I hate giant tellies in drawing rooms. And it's always a battle. So have you got any top tips about either hiding a big TV or treating it as a work of art or something when it's not actually being watched?
I encourage everyone to go by the stand this afternoon at Future Automation. They have some fantastic products when they are the masters of hiding and revealing TVs, which doesn't need to look like a TV because it can have your own piece. There's a triptych on the wall behind us, which is an install that we did in Knightsbridge, and that's a Future Automation lift which hides and reveals a TV. They're just really, really good and really, really reliable. Customers might often say, well, that's another thing to go wrong, and obviously stuff can break, but thankfully their reliability is really, really solid. So that's probably my top tip, because they are custom. They're kings of custom, really. And there's some others.
Yeah, there's artwork, basically artwork on a roller that rolls up to reveal a TV. You can get these Samsung TVs these days that display artwork when they're off, but the artwork doesn't typically glow, so I'm not a fan of those. And mirror TVs, there's one rolling around on the images here, are a good option, although not if it's your main TV. You might want to be happy catching the news on a mirror TV, but it sort of falls between two stools of being a good mirror and a good TV a lot of the time. So, although nowadays actually the mirrors are excellent, it's like a proper crystal mirror, but they are still quite reflective when they're being used as a TV. So you wouldn't want to have it as your main TV.
So you can get TVs that pop up out of furniture or drop down from ceilings or come out from walls.
Yeah, absolutely. As I think most of us who are doing tours with you later on are going to be taking you to the Future Automation stand, because it's just it's amazing some of the stuff they do.
Bit James Bond though.
It is. Yeah.
Just quick follow-up: is there actually a formula of how big a TV has to be, depending on how far the sofa is away?
It depends on
just to settle an argument.
So for a cinematic immersive viewing experience, it's roughly 45 degrees. So it doesn't matter, the size of the room or how far. It's 45 degrees basically to have an immersive viewing experience. Right. So that's for a cinema room. For a lounge, that's unlikely to be achieved unless you have a drop-down screen like's been going on in the background here. That's another good way of hiding a big screen in a drawing room or something like that.
I've got a perfect room for a home cinema. It's got white walls and a wooden floor.
That's not a perfect room for a home cinema then. So
why not?
Well, do you want to do the sound thing? I'll do the picture thing.
Sure. Good idea. I'll do the sound thing. Is that what we agreed?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
It's like to me to you here, isn't it? The Chuckle Brothers. So hard surfaces are really bad in a cinema room because they are reflective. And to give you an example, I'm talking to you right here, and you can hear the sound from my voice. It's coming directly from my voice. Ignore the speakers because it's kind of messing with my geometry. But you'd also be hearing the sound that's bouncing off this wall and the floor and the ceiling, and then it's arriving slightly later than my voice, which came directly to you. Now, in a cinema room, that's really, really bad because that is going to be very confusing for the ear and for the brain because it's going to create noise and it's going to create clutter. So what we want are lots and lots of very soft surfaces and specialist panels in different areas of the room which are scientifically placed to make sure that sound doesn't arrive at different times. You just want to see the action that's happening in time with the action that's happening on the screen. There's lots of, well, it seems very popular at the moment, but I think it's a really nice solution. There's lots of fabric walling systems now where you can do a room within a room. Within that room within a room, the fabric wall is acoustically transparent, and then you have these specialist panels hidden behind the fabric wall. You can also hide the speakers, so you don't have to see them, and normally those fabrics would be picked in accordance with you guys, but a dark fabric because...
Yeah, because
Seamless.
in a great cinema room, you want to be absorbed by what's going on the screen. And in a white room, all the light from the projector is going to bounce off the screen into the room and make you super aware that you're in a room. The other thing that does is that light then bounces back onto the screen again and just takes away all of the contrast in the image. So I guess you've probably all seen projectors in pubs when the England match is on. Yeah, they generally look pretty washed out, and most people's experience of a projector is that they're not particularly great. But done properly in a really dark room, they can look better than a conventional TV. In fact, another stand we're going to take you to later, I think, again, all of us are doing it, is Barco. Makes some amazing projectors that will just realign your thoughts on what's possible with a projected image. Without going back to the sound thing as well, there is like the right amount of echo. In an immersive cinema room, there's we're trying to work to a particular performance specification known as RT60s. That means that reverberation times 60. So a 60 decibel sound, which is a typical speaking voice, should disappear to nothing. So the echo should stop in about 0.32 of a second. So there is that's, and we've got all kinds of clever modelling software made by Cedia, actually, that enables us to plumb all the dimensions of the room into it and put in all of the various surfaces in the room, so whether it's a carpet or a wood floor, how big the sofa is, and then it will help us work out how much absorption and diffusion we need to be able to get the sound right in the room.
Just a specific question. We did a cinema a long time ago now where we put the speakers behind fabric walling, and we were told by the installer on that particular job that actually if you could breathe through it, you could hear through it. So it became a standing joke in our office. People would pick up a people's sound and go to see whether they could breathe through it, to see whether it was suitable for use. Is that true?
Yes.
It is true. There we go.
Yeah, and there are lots of specialist companies, whose name's escaping me now.
Chimera?
Yeah, Chimera, who will actually state whether the fabric is acoustically transparent or not within the spec.
Yeah, on the website you can check, and you can
interesting.
order a selection of the acoustically transparent fabrics.
But the acoustic fabrics that are purpose-built are not terribly attractive generally. So if you're trying to specify kind of normal kind of interior designery fabrics, it's the breathability thing that I think, yes?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. As like a general rule of thumb,
Yeah.
it's a good one to go
And
by.
I guess it depends on the use case as well. If it's a performance room designed specific, if you've spent £100,000 on speakers and amplification for a room, you really want to make sure you put the right fabric in front of it.
For sure.
If it's just background music in a dining room, I guess you can be a little bit less strict on that. So
Yeah.
it's the use case really, I think.
Sure.
I think that's a good rule of thumb for all of these things that we're talking about. A client asked us last week how big their TV should be for their conservatory, and we were like, well, how big do you want it to be? It doesn't. We don't need to apply science to, a TV in the conservatory. Any typical size that suits the room is common sense, isn't it? Sometimes, but when it comes to cinema rooms, it does get quite a bit more exact.
Technical.
Yeah.
What about viewing angles? Because I think a lot of clients might say, can we have the TV above the fireplace?
That's generally a big no-no, but it does depend. Typically, the viewing angle, if we're at 0 here, the viewing angle of your neck really shouldn't be any more plus or minus 15 degrees, and that's the way that you would work out if it's too high over a mantelpiece. I don't think they've got it on their stand, but Future Automation, again, they've got this great product which basically takes a TV over a mantelpiece, and when you turn on the TV, first it drops forwards, and that means it clears the mantle, but then it drops down. So the TV actually is at a much more comfortable and sensible viewing height.
What if you've got the fire on?
That was my but asterisk. So yeah, I think I don't know. Combustibles is meant to be separation of 400-500. You guys would know better than us. So that does need to be considered.
Susie, security. I think you had a question about that.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, we had a client who was very paranoid about security, very high-profile family, and his main concern was the fact that his kids would go out into places like Starbucks, and they would log on to the unsecured network in Starbucks because they're chatting to their friends or they're looking at whatever they're looking at on their devices, and then they'd come home, and even though his network in the house was completely secure, that the children would bring contagion, in effect, back in to the home. Is that an issue, and how do you get around it?
I think there's a lot of scary stuff out there
He'd
about
seen
networks,
that
but
film IT.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
I don't know whether any of you have seen that,
Yeah.
but he was, so this is where he was coming from.
The biggest thing with security that most people do terribly is passwords. Everyone I meet, I'm always banging on at them to get a password manager.
Could you recommend one?
Dashlane is the one I use. There's tons of them out there. 1Password, LastPass. Even iOS has a sort of basic one built into it these days. But the problem with using the same password or a variant of a password on every device that you've got is that if some internet shopping site that you used 4 years ago is compromised, then that person can then just go and try your email and that password and variants of it on every site on the internet, and they'll probably get into a fair few of them. So having unique passwords for every single site is the only way to do it. And if you know your passwords for a site, you're doing it wrong. Basically, you should use a piece of software to manage it. That's the main thing that is going to help keep you secure. So to be able to log into your home automation system, a lot of them are done with a username and a password. And as long as that password's secure and unique, then you'll be fine.
What about window treatments? That's the designer's job, not the integrator's, right?
Yeah, well,
This is going to be a good one.
Over the years, designers are typically are concerned about how things look, right? I think that it's not harsh of me to say that, but quite often the way that the fabric performs in a roller blind, say for instance, is overlooked. So how it actually shades from the sun, does it create glare? Does it stop heat getting into the room? It may look beautiful, but if it's a light-coloured fabric and you're trying to stop glare coming into the room, it won't be the right thing. It will just amplify that glare. So there are all sorts of clever specialist fabrics that integrators are more in tune with, that will look good on the inside, but maybe you have a different coating on the outside to stop heat coming into the room, stop heat gain. And also that they're guaranteed and tested to last for years and years and years, whereas some fabrics that have been picked because they look good might well not have been tested, and they may deteriorate over time, being baked by the sun every day and start warping. And so basically integrators are a bit more in tune with the technical side of things, and we can also help make blinds disappear as well by integrating them into the fabric of the building. There's some really amazing plaster-in profiles we can get to hide roller blinds completely, so that they're completely invisible, and curtain tracks, and so that they're all beautifully plastered in and less visible.
And that would be down to the integrator rather than the interior designer.
Well, I think it's a case of working together. You know, we don't want to eat your lunch. We want to help deliver a better product. You know, ultimately we want to make the project better, and if we can bring something to the table that's going to help do that, then I think that can only be a good thing.
Interior designers are increasingly concerned about sustainability. What about technology? What's the role for technology to save energy or save the planet?
Yeah, I think there's a few things Chris actually touched on earlier in his CPD, where we can save energy. LED, is a really, really commonplace one these days. The other thing is we can use window treatments to save energy by not having solar gain in the room for if you've got everything's made out of glass these days, so you get heat gain. So using blinds and also good system design. So everyone knows that I grew up in a house that had one zone of heating. It was on or off. But these days, obviously, we can have zoned heating, and that can be linked to presence detection, and we're just heating the rooms that we need to heat. With all these things, I think it's super important that it's set up properly. We go back to talk about that VCR player that wasn't set up. If we leave it to the user, it's too much admin, it's too much user intervention to work properly. It needs to be calibrated to work by itself from day one, like a set and forget type thing. So it's a great example of why an integrated system can be so powerful, because if those systems we're not going to integrate the HVAC because of a cost implication or because of this or that reason, our system is completely blind to that. We don't know that there's heating in the house. We're controlling audio video. So by having an integrated system which is linked to presence detection, which is linked to the lighting control system, all of these things can be helping each other to roll back and save energy.
With presence detection, though, some of the underfloor heating systems in particular have very long periods. They heat up and cool down really slowly. If I want to then go into a room that perhaps only used for 2 hours, no, that's not a good example because then you program it. But a room that was intended for occasional use, but I've got to walk in there and be freezing cold for the first hour that I'm in there. How do you get around a problem like that?
By having an integrated system, we can make sure that a lot of the houses we do have air conditioning as well as heating. So we can put the air conditioning system into a boost mode so that the air conditioning blows warm air into the room just to get it up to temperature quickly.
Until the floor comes up to
or radiator.
Spec. Or radiator.
Yeah, radiator for boost. I'd actually say it's more inefficient to have underfloor heating off and on.
It's generally left on. If the house is occupied, the underfloor heating tends to be on at a
constant
most
level.
of the time. Yeah.
Okay, James, here's one about brands. I've heard from this or that person that X is better than the Y that you've talked about or specified. Why are you using X and not Y?
There are, as you walk around the show floor in a bit, you'll see there's a lot of manufacturers, and I wouldn't say that any of them are particularly any better than the others, or they wouldn't be selling what they sell. I think that the important thing is to go with what trust you're into. It's all about trust. You've got to trust that the guy who's recommending a system is doing it for the right reasons, and don't try and shoehorn them into using another brand that they don't use. These systems are complex, and I personally don't think that you can be particularly good at doing all of them. Some of our competitors put on their website that they do 6-7 different home control systems. I just don't think you can be good at more than one or two. So if you're asking your integrator to go with a particular brand that he's not comfortable with, you could be causing a lot of headaches for everyone involved.
So if you're specifying or you want to use a particular system because you particularly like the look of the user interface, you then have to find an integrator that specialises in that system?
That would be my recommendation. Although most of the brands have a wide range of user of keypads that can be used with the system, and they can all integrate with. A lot of the time, we'll do sort of very simple flick switches or push button switches, Forbes and Lomax or Focus SB, and they can be linked into some of the home control systems as well. So none of these systems are particularly good or bad. They're just different. It's kind of like BMW and Mercedes. They're both great cars, but one of them isn't significantly better than the other, I would say.
You agree with that, Pip?
I wholeheartedly agree that you should not steer an integrator against something that they're not familiar with. It will generally end badly for everyone, even down to the nth degree of something like cable. There's a really strong argument for putting all your eggs in one basket when you trust someone. The worst thing that can happen in a project is finger pointing at the end of the project. Quite a classic one that we come across might be that the client is a business owner and they've got an in-house IT department in their office, and they want to use that IT guy to also do their home, but they're using us for other aspects of the technology in the home, and we will pretty strongly buck that to the point where we would probably say we're not for you in this case, because we never want to be in a situation at the end of the project where our system is so reliant on the network that we didn't design or install and have no visibility or control over. It will just end in massive tears and lots of finger pointing. So, yeah.
And one final question from me. You guys might have some more after this, but how on earth do you find a decent integrator?
Yeah.
Too easy.
You just found a few today, but there's. I think it's like anything. Go with a recommendation. Is a good way to start. There's a huge variant, just like interior designers. There's a big difference in skill sets out there. Some interior designers are just good at curtains and cushions, and then there's others that are more architectural, and it's exactly the same for integrators. There's some guys that are good at hanging TVs on the wall, and then there's others that are capable of doing larger, more complex things. So Cedia, if Cedia is a great place to start. They've recently introduced different levels of membership as well to sort of separate out skill sets and accreditation. Members of Excellence are we're one of them. You are too as well, aren't you?
Yeah, and Chris.
That's a good differentiator. But just interview them, see if you get on with them. You're going to be working with these guys for a good few years, so it's really important that you just get on. That's a key thing.
Have you guys got any more questions?
No, I don't.
Has anyone got any questions from the floor? Yes. Okay, I'm going to pass you my mic.
You used a very good analogy about shaking out the bits that move. What was the terminology you used? Because I'm definitely going to use it.
Yeah, well, we call it a built-in works. That's the package which goes inside the house and is in the structure of the building, and then a final fit package, which is the parts that fall out. Yeah.
Question here.
Yeah, my question is actually going back to the costs, which were sort of skirted over a little bit. And recalling about 20 years ago when we put in a smart home system in a flat, 3-bedroom flat, cost about 200 grand back then. Had everything, blinds, everything, full Monty. The client complained because he couldn't get Radio 4 at the end. That was his biggest issue. However, I'm pretty certain that if I asked the same question about costs for that same flat today, the costs might very likely come out about the same. Now, everything is coming down in cost. Hardware, probably the wiring, and I'm wondering, with our ambitions as an architect, certainly, in addressing the climate emergency, we should be aiming to drive down the costs so that we can install these systems in every new build, new block of apartments or houses, whatever, and then integrate all of these individual homes into the bigger urban smart city aspiration. But this is just a dig, a slight dig, that I think because it's mainly been focused on high-end housing, this technology, the installers have been sort of riding on the crest of a wave for the past 20 years and are still a bit loath to give out that information. You say there's like an online configurator, but if I'm pretty certain we should be able to do it for 25% of the cost that it cost me 20 years ago, but I might still expect to pay the same again.
Good question. Who wants to take that particular one?
Take one for the team.
There are systems out there that are less expensive. Not so many of them are really integrated, like Philips Hue lighting, for example. That's so it doesn't perform as well as an actual light source as a good quality downlight. So that's one reason that we don't like using that kind of thing. There are also all these sort of smart home districts, kind of probably Brad touched on it earlier on. None of them particularly gel together very well. I mean, right now, I must say, it is a high-end luxury thing, and I think maybe I'm not. You've got something better to say than
Help him
I'm
out,
saying.
Pip. Help him
Yeah.
out. Come on.
Just on the cost side of things, I wish the cost was coming down because it would make our jobs so much easier. We would do more projects and have more clients. We all know what's happened to the pound in the past years, and all of our products come from America. This is getting more expensive, unfortunately. At the moment, I'm just going to put out there, you know, copper cable is made in America. Copper is getting more expensive. The cost of it is going up. We've just got educated on a new Wi-Fi standard. It's about £1,500 for a booster if you want one, and it's just, you know, scary. Cybersecurity is huge. If you need that extra box for your cybersecurity, it's, you know, about £3,000 maybe for a box like that.
That said, I think
there's,
is Richard still here? Is it Richard from Aonix? Richard specialises in doing MDU, multiple dwelling units, and I think they've got a pretty good they've just become excellent at doing lots of low cost installations across huge developments. So it can be done. Control 4 got some cracking products where you could put together a system in a small apartment with some lighting control and some heating control for a couple of £1,000.
Would it be fair to say, James, that there are different integrators operating at different levels of the market? So it's not a horses for courses, all luxury
Yeah,
market
not
anymore.
just different levels, but different areas as well. As I say, Aonix, I know they do an awful lot of stuff, with big developments. And I think Pip and I are probably more niche, bespoke architect, interior design
private
led.
client.
Yeah. So
it depends on the business model, doesn't it? But yeah, I mean, yeah, these systems would be great for everyone if they were installed everywhere, and obviously that's the goal. Going back to your project in Chelsea, right? I think it's such a hard question to answer, and I'm not going to skirt it again. But we never met that client. You know, we didn't know what they want or their wish list, or, you know, that you can. We had a client the other day who asked for gold cable. He wanted the cable made of gold because of the quality of it. He'd heard from somewhere that was really good, and then we gave him the price of the copper cable, and he said, "Oh, that's too expensive."
And also, if you were putting in the same system today, it wouldn't be the same system. So surely, actually, the system's much more sophisticated now. Perhaps actually there hasn't been a price increase. It's just that it's remained the same, but actually you're getting more bang for your buck than you did.
Absolutely, yeah.
How much did those old Pioneer plasmas cost?
Oh yeah, tens of thousands. I mean, we're like crikey. I mean, back in the day, we would install an 85-inch TV, and it was 25 grand, and now they're $3 grand. Yeah, I mean, so it's
For instance, a reel of cable. If I was putting cable back then, I know it was hugely expensive, but what is it, £1,000 for Cat 6 or something like that?
Well, I think we're just using nowadays, because everything is now. We used to use a lot more expensive cables than we do now. Everything's networking based, and there's probably several miles of networking cable in this building. It's a commodity and it's pretty cheap. You buy a 300 meter drum of Cat 5 for about 80 quid, something like that. So the cabling has probably come down a lot compared to some of the expensive cables we used to use.
But on that point, I mentioned about fibre optic cables, which we need to meet what the TV manufacturers are demanding, and that is £pounds per metre. And it's still very, very expensive because it has to be high quality, and you need lots of fibre cables in a single jacket to maybe do potential things. So you have to remember that every year, you know, the owners of LG and Samsung and Sony, they sit down in their boardrooms and they say, right, how are we going to sell next year's TVs? And then we have to, you know, meet the demands on the infrastructure for that.
I get your point that we're skirting around the budget thing a bit, but it's kind of like if you go to, you know, say, I want a nice kitchen, how much is that going to be? And
I was going to get to that because in the same houses, you know, we could be speccing a high-end kitchen that costs 120, 150,000, and the dealers have been complaining about pre-Brexit. We're not selling any of those kitchens anymore. The clients are just not spending that money, and I'm saying to them, well, You know, why not look at selling 10 kitchens at 25 grand instead of 2 at 150? And, you know, you're going to get more punters taking up those kind of offers. And I can only think it must be the same for you guys.
I think the other thing is, we're at the moment we're pretty skills short in our market. So if you're good at this, then why not work at the top end? Because there is not a dearth of there is a dearth of really knowledgeable integrators around, I must say. So there's a bit of that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. You know, working with 10 clients to make the same amount of money is much harder than working with one, and I'm sure you all know that. So it's
but
just
if the one client doesn't exist, then the other 10 who can afford the technology.
Absolutely.
Isn't it a no-brainer?
Probably the way the market's going to go, I think.
Yeah.
Can I just ask one more question if anybody's got one?
Hi. Sorry, it's quite a specific question. I've got a client at the moment. We're designing some cabinetry for them. They want to put a subwoofer in their TV room, but they don't want to see it. And I was wondering, so they want to put it in the cabinetry, and I was wondering if there's any sort of hard surface or anything that we can put in front of it that will still give it the quality that they're buying.
There's loads of options. We need to see the cabinetry, see what you've got in mind, but there will almost certainly be a way that we can hide one in there, I would say.
I think you'll probably see at least a dozen options when you go around the show this afternoon. The person that's taking you around will definitely know. We quite often do subs which are so hidden that you just get the joiner to cut some routed slots into the joinery, and then if you want, you can marry that up on the other side or have a pair of subs. It's really design specific, but you do not have to see it. And for any, not naysayers, but negative side of things, if you were ever going to do anything like that, like build something inside, you make it what we call passive. And that means that all of the electronics, the part which can potentially fail, we put that in another room in the centralized location. And then if that fails, you can just easily change that out, but you're not breaking the wall or breaking the joinery to get this passive piece of the device out, because it's literally passive. It works on a magnet.
Thank you. And sorry, my last question, which is a bit more general. Given how we are so technically evolved now, and Wi-Fi and things like that, are there any risks to our health of having very connected homes?
Good question.
We do hear that a lot. Unfortunately, there's not a great deal you can do to get away from Wi-Fi now, because it's everywhere. I mean, if I turn on my phone now and looked at how many Wi-Fi networks there are in this room, there's probably a dozen, I would guess. But the power, the reason Wi-Fi quite often does suck in people's houses is because it's not very powerful. If you compare it to, say, your mobile phone, which is talking to a radio transmitter that's maybe a mile away, well, the Wi-Fi won't work quite often on the other side of the room. So it's way lower power. It's hard to convince someone that's convinced about this otherwise. There's all sorts of reading on the internet that you can do one way and the other. Yes.
Just to add a point, for every white paper that says this is bad, one of the manufacturers will employ a boffin who will write a white paper to say that's rubbish. So it's very hard to talk like scientifically to you. What we try and do, if that's important to the customer, is through integration and having an integrated system. You might have a light switch by your bedside, and when you push that good night button, we can do things like disable the antenna on the Wi-Fi boosters. So when you're asleep, the Wi-Fi isn't emitting anymore, and you can sleep soundly. We don't actually turn the Wi-Fi booster off, because when they wake up in the morning, they don't want that startup time of the booster rebooting. So when they press good morning, we just send a command to the Wi-Fi booster to turn back on the radio antenna, and the Wi-Fi comes back on. But it's a huge advantage of, again, if we didn't integrate those two systems together with home automation, they wouldn't know each other existed.
Great answer.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you to our panelists. Let's have a round of applause.
Again, our panelists were as follows, and we thank them. Designers Dean Keyworth of Armstrong Keyworth and Susie Rumbold of Tessuto. The integrators, James Radcliffe of HomePlay and Pip Evans of NV Integration. And of course, thanks to our guest host for this one, Jeff Hayward of Wildwood PR. The session was sponsored by Control 4, by the way. My name is Ed Wank. Thanks very much for listening to this special edition of the CEDIA podcast. We will see you in the future.
For more information on CEDIA, visit cedia.net.